All right. Hey everyone. We're going to talk about a couple of different things today that you're going to need to complete some of the activities that I've left for you today. So, first thing we need to talk about is different types of data. So, types of data. Right. Now, you may remember this from Year 7, back when we did maths and DT. We talked about the two different types of data, but just in case you've forgotten, they fall into two categories. So generally speaking, I'm just going to put a circle here. They fall under the categories of categorical, or this is often also referred to as qualitative. And I always struggle to say that word, so forgive me if I'm sort of saying it awfully slowly. I also say the next one, I struggle saying the next one too. But the other one is numerical. Right? So numerical, or this is called quantitative. Right? And they refer to the two different types of data you can collect, with categorical being essentially words and numerical being numbers. That's the general difference between the two. There are some things that I guess are a little bit more specific that you can go into that separate them more so than that, but that's the general consensus. One is words, one is numbers. Now each of these two categories break down into two further categories from here. Right. So depending on which way the data is collected, they can be two different types, I guess, is the way to think of it. Now, the two different categorical types are ordinal and nominal. Right? So they're the two different data types for categorical. The two different data types for numerical are discrete, and continuous. And I'll give you a small rundown about what each of those two things mean. Again, we can go into a lot more detail, but just so you got a general idea of what they are. The difference between these two is ordinal, as the name suggests, is the answers are words, but there is some sort of order to them. So for example, we may get a survey that says like, how much do you love maths? And it might be like a lot, a bit, so, maybe hate it, and terrible, right? And that's probably a bad example. A better example than that would have been, say, very high, medium, low, very low, something like that. But there is a clear order between these answers, so that essentially it's a hierarchy, and the one that's up the top, it means that you feel strongly about this, and the one at the bottom means that, you also feel strongly about this, but you feel about it in a different way. So, a good example is high, medium, low, etc. Now, nominal is words that have no order, where it doesn't matter what order you write your answers in, because they don't mean a whole lot based off the order that they're in. So, for example, what color are your eyes? Right? You can have blue, green, brown, etc. Right? And it doesn't matter what order these answers are put in; they still make sense. Right? So that's what nominal means. Whereas ordinal, they have to be sort of put in order to make sense. If that helps you see the difference between the two. So that's categorical data. Now we also look at numerical data, which is in discrete and continuous. Now, discrete doesn't mean discrete as in the other discrete, which I think is actually spelled differently. I think it's spelled like that, as in like be discrete, and don't make a big spectacle of what you're about to do. Right? So it's a different discrete. This discrete means to, it's actually from a Latin phrase, and it means to be separate, right? Or countable is the way that I like to think of it. So it's answers to questions like, how many siblings do you have? How many TVs are in your home? Something like that. Right? So discrete might be countable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And generally speaking, these are whole numbers, right? And they will always be whole numbers, right? They don't make a whole lot of sense otherwise. You can't say, well, I have 2.5 TVs in my home. Well, how do you have half of a TV? I suppose if you get creative with a hacksaw, it's possible, but then I would still consider it to be one TV that's just broken, right? So discrete means countable, and generally speaking are whole numbers. Continuous sort of more goes on the lines of measurable, right? And they tend to be things like, what is your height, right? And these tend to be, I mean, they don't tend to be, I shouldn't say that, but they can be numbers that have, say, decimals in it, right? So things like, what is your height? You might be 182.3 centimeters. That's pretty tall for a year, right? Maybe you're shorter than that. Maybe you're 155.35 centimeters, right? These values are generally measured in some way, in a non-counting sort of way. So you maybe use a tool to measure them, for example, a ruler. And generally speaking, they're not whole numbers, or they don't have to be whole numbers. So that's the basic gist of the two different categories, so categorical or qualitative, and numerical or quantitative, and then a breakdown of what the individual of the four data types are, okay? So in terms of the data we're looking at today, we're going to be focusing mostly on discrete data, right? We can deal with these other ones, and we have done it in DT and maths back in year 7, but just for today, we're dealing with discrete. In particular, we're looking at some questions that are going something like this. So it might be, we have collected some data from our class, and I asked you how many TV shows have you binge watched in the last month, right? So how many TV shows have you binge watched? And the results are something like this. We got, say 2, 7, 3, 1, 0, 9, 11, 6, 3, 4, 8. Right? So let's say that's my data. So this is how many shows you have binge watched in the last year or so, right? Now we're going to do a couple of things with this data. First thing that we need to do though is to put them into order, ascending order in particular. So generally speaking, if you're going to do that, my typical way is just sort of do a thing where you start with this number and you go, okay, are there any numbers smaller than that? Okay, 1 smaller than that. So now I'm thinking about 1. Any number smaller than that? Well, 0 is smaller than that. Are there any numbers smaller than 0? No, there's not. So cross off 0 and I write it in the first spot. Now 1 was the next smallest. Are there any numbers smaller than 1? No. Right. I'll try and make this a bit quicker. I think I had a second 3, 4, a 6, a 7, an 8, a 9, and an 11. All right. So that's rewriting these numbers in ascending order. Now we're going to look at a couple of different measures, and these are generally speaking they're measures of center. We will also look at an aspect of measures of spread, but we're going to look at measures of center. Now the 3 measures of center I want to talk about are mean, median, and the most useless of the 3, mode. All right. And we're going to talk about what these different words mean. And then after that, we'll have a look at range, which can be our measure of spread. All right. So what do these phrases mean? What does mean mean? I'll tell you what mean means. What it means. I'm gonna start saying average to avoid confusion. So mean is average, and what that is essentially we're finding out if we collected all these numbers up. What is the, I guess, the middle no, I shouldn't use that phraseology because that's median. But if I added them all up, then divided by how many numbers there are, what is the average of these numbers? Basically, that's what it's saying. So to solve that, I'm going to go, okay, I've got 0 plus 1 gives me 1, plus 2 gives me 3, plus 3 gives me 6, plus 3 gives me 9, plus 4 gives me, 13, plus 6 gives me 19, plus 7 gives me 26, plus 8 gives me 34, plus 9 gives me 43, and then plus 11 gives me 54. Alright, so that's the total amount that I've added that up. And it's important to know that because the formula for mean is the total, or I should put sum, the sum of the numbers divided by the number of numbers, or how many numbers there are, right? So that's essentially what we're looking at, the sum total divided by how many numbers there are. So I have 54 divided by how many numbers are there. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 numbers, which is a bit of an annoying number to deal with, but at the time I didn't really think that through. So 54 divided by 11 could have been so easy if it was 10, but that's okay. Right, and that will give me something. That will give me about 4.9, something like that. I think it's pretty safe to assume it's about 4.9. I'll chuck it in my calculator just to give you the exact value. 54 divided by 11. It is exactly it's 4.91. I was close. 4.91. It's off by 0.01. Anyway, so that's my mean. So 4.91, meaning the average number of TV shows that were binge watched by this class is 4.91. Now the other measure of spread, measure of center, far out. The other measure of center that we use is the median. And the median means middle. So which one of these is the middle number? Okay, and the way to do that is you count up how many numbers there are total, add 1 onto that total, and then divide it by 2, and that will tell you where the middle one is. There's other ways you can do it. You know, you can sort of start like this and work your way into the middle. That's fine too. But if you have a big data set, how you do it is you count up the total number. So in this case is 11. Add 1 onto that, and then divide the whole thing by 2. So 12 divided by 2 is 6, meaning that the 6th number is in the middle. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, meaning that in this case, the 4 is the median. And you can sort of tell that that's the case because either side we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so our median number in this case is 4. If there is a situation where 2 numbers are in the middle, right, let's say you do your division and you get the 5.5th number, in that situation, if it's between 2 numbers, you average out those 2 numbers to find the median, right? So if hypothetically I was to have another number on here, I would be averaging out my 4 and 6, which would give me the value 5. That's just a hypothetical. And now the worst measure of center is mode, and that just finds which number has been written down the most times. All right, so it's which one is the most frequent of the data set. And you might look at that and see that that's pretty easy because 3 is the only number that's written twice. Therefore, the mode in this case is the number 3. You can often have 2 modes. You can have 3 even. That's called multimodal. Or that you can have bimodal, which is to have 2 modes, but in this case we only have 1. So that's mean, median, mode, and that's something that you will need to be able to do today. And then the last one is range, right? And range is a measure of spread, and it's probably the most straightforward measure of spread. All it is what is the max number minus the min number. So what's the highest number minus the smallest number? So in this case, 11 is my highest. Subtract away 0, which is my smallest, and there's no points for getting 11 minus 0 because that is 11, meaning our range is 11. Okay, so that's mean, median, and mode, and that's one of the things that I'm going to ask you to try and do today. Now, without going into it too much, because you don't need to know how to solve it, the other thing to consider is what is an outlier. And essentially an outlier is a value that is so outrageous that it doesn't really belong with the rest of the data, to the point where you think it's going to affect the data too much to be plausible. So let's say we had we had the exact same data set, right? So I'm not going to write the whole thing out again, but instead of 11 being our max, after 11 we had, say, 62, somebody's just super into TV shows, we would consider that to be an outlier because that is a ridiculous number of TV shows to be watching. And essentially, compared to the rest of the data, it's a bit outrageous, right? So that's what an outlier is. It's a piece of data that's really different from the rest of it. Generally speaking, in statistics, you will remove these pieces of data because they are not necessarily reflective of the whole group. You might be like, well, why is that? If you include that in your average, all of a sudden it's not going to be 4.91. If you include 62 in it, it's going to be 10, right? Which bumps the average up heaps. Yeah, so that's about it in terms of what I want to talk about for this stuff. I'm also going to add in a second video where I go over the next activity. So you're going to have to listen to me drone on for a little bit longer. Thanks everyone. Bye.